In the quiet corners of our everyday lives, there exists a particular kind of courage that the world rarely recognizes. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare or demand attention through grand gestures. Instead, it moves through life with careful steps, wearing the face of composure while carrying storms beneath the surface. This is the courage of those who have learned to say, everything's fine when their world feels like it's crumbling. The courage of people who show up, day after day, maintaining their responsibilities and caring for others, while their own hearts whisper desperate pleas for rest. They are the masters of emotional camouflage, so skilled at hiding their pain that even they sometimes forget it's there. You've encountered them before, perhaps you are one of them. They're the colleague who never misses a deadline despite personal chaos, the friend who always listens but never shares their own struggles, the family member who keeps everyone else afloat while quietly drowning themselves. Their strength has become their prison, and their resilience has transformed into a kind of beautiful, heartbreaking isolation. The architecture of emotional hiding, what drives a person to become a master of disguise when it comes to their own pain? The answer lies buried in the complex psychology of survival and social conditioning. Most people who excel at emotional masking didn't choose this path consciously. They were taught it through experience, often beginning in childhood when vulnerability felt dangerous. Picture a young child who reaches out for comfort and finds empty air. Imagine a teenager whose tears are met with impatience, or whose fears are dismissed as overreaction. Consider the countless moments when authentic emotion was labeled as weakness, inconvenience, or burden. Over time, these experiences create an internal blueprint, showing pain brings rejection, so hiding pain becomes safety. This psychological adaptation serves a purpose initially. It protects the developing self from further emotional injury. But like a cast that remains on a healed bone too long, what once provided protection eventually restricts growth and movement. The person learns to navigate life with their emotional range artificially limited, believing this limitation is actually strength. The fascinating and tragic irony is that society often reinforces this behavior. We celebrate stoicism, praise those who never complain, and admire people who seem unbreakable. We create cultural narratives around pushing through pain, staying positive, and never giving up. But we rarely discuss the psychological cost of never allowing ourselves to feel, process, or honestly acknowledge our struggles. The hidden mechanics of emotional suppression. When someone becomes fluent in the language of "I'm fine," they're engaging in a complex psychological process that extends far beyond simple denial. Emotional suppression involves the active management of internal states to maintain external appearances. It's like running a sophisticated computer program in the background of consciousness, constantly monitoring, adjusting, and controlling emotional output to match social expectations. Research in psychology reveals that chronic emotional suppression creates measurable changes in the brain and body. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and emotional regulation, becomes hyperactive as it works overtime to maintain the facade. Meanwhile, the parts of the brain associated with authentic emotional processing begin to show decreased activity. It's as if the person slowly rewires themselves to prioritize performance over genuine feeling. This rewiring has consequences. People who habitually suppress emotions often report feeling disconnected from their own experiences. They describe life as feeling muffled, like experiencing everything through thick glass. Joy becomes harder to access, because the same mechanisms that block pain also interfere with pleasure. They may find themselves going through the motions of happiness, smiling, laughing, participating, while feeling strangely absent from their own lives. The body, unable to distinguish between physical and emotional stress, responds to chronic suppression as if under constant threat. Cortisol levels remain elevated, immune function decreases, and mysterious physical symptoms begin to appear. Headaches without clear cause, fatigue that sleep doesn't cure, and a general sense of heaviness become the body's way of expressing what the mind refuses to acknowledge. The paradox of connection and isolation. Perhaps the cruelest aspect of emotional masking is how it affects relationships. The very people who are most skilled at hiding their pain often crave deep connection more than anyone else. They hunger for someone to see through their careful construction of normalcy and recognize the person struggling beneath. Yet their expertise in emotional camouflage makes this recognition nearly impossible. They become attracted to relationships where they can focus on others' needs rather than their own. They excel as listeners, supporters, and problem solvers because these roles feel safe and familiar. Helping others in pain doesn't trigger the same vulnerability as revealing their own struggles. They can experience emotional intimacy vicariously, through the lens of someone else's honesty, while maintaining their own protective walls. But this creates an exhausting imbalance. They give endlessly while receiving little. Not because others don't care, but because they've become so skilled at appearing self-sufficient that people assume they don't need support. Their mask is so convincing that even those closest to them may never suspect the depth of their internal struggles. This dynamic creates a profound sense of loneliness, the kind that can exist even in crowded rooms, even in loving relationships, even in successful careers. It's the loneliness of being known for who you pretend to be, rather than who you actually are. The longer this continues, the more the person may begin to wonder if their authentic self even exists anymore, or if the mask has become their entire identity. The slow erosion of self-trust. When someone spends years translating their emotions into socially acceptable versions, they gradually lose touch with their internal compass. The ability to trust their own feelings, a fundamental aspect of psychological health, begins to deteriorate. They start second-guessing their reactions, wondering if their sadness is justified, if their exhaustion is real, if their need for support is legitimate. This erosion of self-trust has far-reaching implications. Decision-making becomes increasingly difficult because decisions require access to authentic feelings about options and outcomes. Career choices, relationship decisions, and even simple daily preferences become clouded when you've trained yourself to prioritize others' comfort over your own truth. The person may find themselves living a life that looks successful from the outside, but feels hollow from within. They may have achieved many goals, maintained stable relationships, and earned respect from peers, yet feel profoundly disconnected from their own accomplishments. It's as if they've built a beautiful house but forgotten they're allowed to live in it. This disconnection often manifests as a persistent sense of imposter syndrome, the feeling that they're fraudulent, that their successes are undeserved, that they're fooling everyone around them. In a way, this feeling contains a grain of truth. They have been performing a version of themselves rather than living authentically. But the solution isn't to perform better, it's to stop performing altogether. The physical language of unexpressed emotion. The human body possesses an incredible capacity for truth-telling, even when the conscious mind has learned to lie. When emotions are consistently suppressed rather than processed, they don't simply disappear. They transform. They become physical sensations, chronic conditions, and mysterious symptoms that medical tests often can't fully explain. Tension headaches may be the result of constantly holding back tears. Digestive issues might reflect the stress of swallowing emotions, rather than expressing them. Chronic fatigue could be the natural consequence of using enormous amounts of energy to maintain emotional facades. Insomnia might develop as the mind struggles to process during sleep what it couldn't process during waking hours. These physical manifestations aren't weakness or failure, they're communication. The body is attempting to express what the person hasn't allowed themselves to feel consciously. It's as if the suppressed emotions find alternative routes to the surface, speaking through symptoms rather than words. Understanding this connection between emotional suppression and physical symptoms can be both validating and alarming for people who have mastered the art of appearing fine. It validates their experience, their struggle is real, even if invisible, but it also reveals the unsustainable nature of chronic emotional masking. The body is essentially saying, you can't keep doing this indefinitely. The cultural conspiracy of positivity. Our society has created an environment where emotional authenticity often feels not just uncomfortable, but almost antisocial. The pressure to maintain positivity, to focus on solutions rather than problems, and to not bring others down with our struggles creates a collective agreement to perform wellness rather than pursue it genuinely. Social media amplifies this dynamic exponentially. The curated highlight reels of others' lives create an impossible standard of constant happiness and success. People who are already skilled at emotional masking find themselves in an environment that rewards and reinforces their tendency to hide struggle. The algorithm favors positivity. Careers can be damaged by visible vulnerability, and social connections often seem contingent on maintaining an upbeat facade. This cultural context makes the journey toward emotional honesty feel like swimming upstream. It requires swimming against not just personal conditioning, but societal expectations. It means risking judgment, misunderstanding, and potentially losing relationships or opportunities that were built on false premises. Yet this same cultural dynamic creates a profound hunger for authenticity. When someone does dare to be honest about their struggles, others often respond with relief and recognition. It's as if everyone is waiting for someone else to give them permission to stop pretending, to acknowledge that life is difficult, and that struggling doesn't equal failing. The turning point, when pretending becomes impossible. For many people who have perfected emotional masking, there comes a moment when the system simply breaks down. It might be triggered by a major loss, a health crisis, a relationship ending, or sometimes just the accumulated weight of years spent hiding. The mechanisms that once felt protective suddenly feel suffocating. The mask that once provided safety begins to feel like a prison. This breakdown, while frightening, often represents the beginning of genuine healing. It's the moment when the cost of pretending finally exceeds the cost of being honest. The person realizes that they've been spending enormous amounts of energy maintaining an illusion that isn't serving them anymore. This realization doesn't make the transition easy. Learning to be emotionally honest after years of suppression can feel like learning to walk again after an injury. The emotional muscles have atrophied from lack of use. Expressing authentic feelings can trigger anxiety, guilt, or fear of overwhelming others. The person may worry that their emotions are too intense, too messy, or too much for others to handle. But this awkward transition phase is actually a sign of healing. It represents the return of emotional range, the restoration of internal communication, and the beginning of genuine self-compassion. The person is learning to treat their own emotions with the same kindness they've always shown to others. The courage of small truths healing from chronic emotional suppression doesn't require dramatic revelations or complete personality overhauls. Often it begins with tiny acts of honesty that feel enormous to the person taking them. Answering "How are you?" with "I'm having a tough week, but I'll be okay," instead of "Fine, thanks." Allowing themselves to cry during a sad movie without apologizing. Taking a mental health day without manufacturing a physical excuse. These small truthful moments create cracks in the facade, allowing authentic emotion to seep through. Each honest interaction builds evidence that vulnerability doesn't lead to catastrophe. People don't flee when you admit to struggling. Relationships often deepen rather than disappear when you allow others to see your humanity. The process requires patience because it involves unlearning patterns that took years to establish. It means learning to tolerate the discomfort that comes with authentic emotion. It means accepting that being real sometimes means being messy, confused, or imperfect. But it also means rediscovering the full spectrum of human experience, including joy that isn't performed and peace that isn't fabricated. The ripple effect of authenticity. When someone who has mastered emotional masking begins to live more authentically, the effects extend far beyond their personal experience. Their honesty gives others permission to drop their own masks. Their vulnerability creates space for genuine connection. Their willingness to be imperfect challenges the perfectionism that others may be struggling with silently. This ripple effect is particularly powerful because it comes from someone who clearly understands the alternative. When a person who has always appeared strong admits to weakness, it carries more weight than the same admission from someone who has always been emotionally open. It says even the strongest people struggle. And that's not just okay, it's human. The relationships that survive this transition to authenticity are transformed. They become based on genuine connection rather than performance. The person discovers who actually cares about them versus who only appreciated their emotional labor. This can be painful, as some relationships may not survive the shift, but it also creates space for much deeper, more nourishing connections to develop. Redefining strength and success. Perhaps the most profound shift that occurs when someone stops pretending to be okay is a complete redefinition of strength. The old definition, never showing weakness, never asking for help, never admitting struggle, gives way to a more nuanced understanding. True strength becomes the ability to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, to ask for support when needed, and to maintain integrity even when it's uncomfortable. Success, too, gets redefined. Instead of measuring success by external achievements or others' perceptions, it becomes about internal alignment. Success becomes living in a way that honors your authentic self, building relationships based on truth rather than performance, and contributing to the world from a place of wholeness rather than depletion. This shift doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or becoming self-indulgent. Instead, it means approaching life from a place of genuine strength rather than compensatory strength. It means making decisions based on authentic values rather than fear-based protection. It means showing up as yourself, rather than as who you think others need you to be. The ongoing journey of emotional honesty, learning to be emotionally honest, is not a destination, but a practice. There will be days when the old patterns resurface, when the temptation to mask returns, when vulnerability feels too risky. This is normal and expected. The goal isn't perfect authenticity, but rather a general movement toward truth, with compassion for the moments when protection still feels necessary. The practice involves developing what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between different emotional states with precision, instead of the binary of fine or not fine. The person learns to recognize and articulate the subtle variations of human feeling. They might notice the difference between tired and overwhelmed, between sad and disappointed, between anxious and excited. This emotional vocabulary becomes a tool for self-understanding and communication with others. It allows for more precise requests for support, clearer boundaries, and more authentic relationships. It transforms the person from someone who experiences emotions as threats to be managed into someone who experiences them as information to be honored. The gift of presence. One of the most beautiful outcomes of learning to stop pretending is the development of genuine presence. When someone is no longer spending energy maintaining emotional facades, that energy becomes available for actually experiencing life. Colors seem more vivid, connections feel more real, and even difficult emotions carry a kind of aliveness that performance never could. This presence is a gift, not only to the person themselves, but to everyone around them. When someone is genuinely present, not performing presence, not pretending engagement, but actually there, it creates a quality of interaction that nourishes everyone involved. Their authenticity invites others into their own authenticity, creating moments of genuine human connection that are increasingly rare in our performance-oriented culture. The person who has learned to stop pretending often becomes a safe harbor for others who are still learning. Their comfort with imperfection gives others permission to be imperfect. Their willingness to acknowledge struggle makes it safer for others to admit their own difficulties. They become living proof that you can survive being real. That authenticity doesn't destroy you, but rather reveals who you actually are beneath the protective layers. The wisdom of integration. As the journey toward emotional honesty progresses, something beautiful begins to happen. The divided self starts to integrate. The performer and the person, the mask and the truth, begin to merge into something more cohesive and whole. This doesn't mean the person becomes emotionally incontinent or inappropriately vulnerable in all situations. Rather, they develop the wisdom to know when authenticity serves connection and when boundaries serve protection. This integration brings a kind of internal peace that pretending could never provide. It's the peace of not having to remember which version of yourself you presented to which person. It's the relief of not having to maintain multiple emotional personas. It's the freedom of being able to show up as yourself, trusting that your authentic self is enough. The person discovers that they don't have to be perfect to be lovable, successful to be valuable, or constantly positive to be worthy of connection. They learn that their struggles don't make them broken but human, that their needs don't make them burdensome but real, and that their emotions don't make them weak but alive. The continuous becoming. Perhaps most importantly, the person who learns to stop pretending discovers that being human is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be embraced. They stop trying to graduate from having emotions, and instead learn to dance with them. They stop seeing their sensitivity as a flaw, and begin to recognize it as a superpower. They stop apologizing for taking up space, and start appreciating the unique perspective they bring to the world. This doesn't mean life becomes easy, or that pain disappears. If anything, allowing themselves to feel might initially make life feel more intense, but it also makes joy more accessible, love more genuine, and peace more sustainable. They discover that the goal was never to avoid difficulty, but to meet it with authenticity, not to eliminate struggle, but to face it without losing themselves in the process. The journey from pretending to being is ultimately a journey home. Home to yourself, home to your truth, home to the messy, beautiful, complex reality of being human. It's a journey that takes courage, patience, and compassion, but it leads to the most important destination of all, a life that feels genuinely yours, lived by someone who is genuinely you. In the end, perhaps that's what all the pretending was protecting. Not weakness, but something infinitely precious, your authentic self, waiting patiently beneath all the performance. For the moment you would finally decide it was safe to come home.